Today we're going to talk about Japanese internment. The American citizen who owned the store, the photograph that you're looking at, the guy who owned this store, put this sign up the day after Pearl Harbor was bombed. Last year we did a lot of work around World War II, and I know you know the background of World War II, so I want to spend some time talking about what's unique to the United States in this class, and Japanese internment is one of those topics. So like so many other people, this Japanese American was forced to sell his property almost immediately after the strike on Pearl Harbor. And I'll hope that you'll spend some time thinking about the photographs you see today for a couple of reasons. First of all, I want to introduce you to a lady named Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange was hired by the government during the Depression to go out and photograph life in the United States. She was able to take some of the most iconic photos of this time period in U.S. history, in part because she was female. She suffered from polio, so she had a limp. So she seemed a little less intimidating. You know, if a government official came up and asked you, "Can I take your picture?" you might hesitate. But she came across as very approachable, and as a result, she got some of the most beautiful pictures in U.S. history. And because she worked for the government, it's all in the public domain, which means we can enjoy it. So almost all the photographs you're going to see are Dorothea Lange pictures. And through her lens, she's giving you her perspective on this story. So I wonder if you can be thinking about that as we move forward. These are Dorothea Lange pictures, obviously. So let's get to our story. So our story is called Forgetting the Constitution. Haruko Obata lived in a house in the lovely tree-shaded Berkeley, California neighborhood. Her father was a professor at the University of California. Haruko was an American citizen, and like most Japanese Americans, she was really proud of her Asian heritage, but she didn't approve of the ways of the warlords who ruled the Japanese Empire were behaving. In school, she studied the Constitution and its guarantees, and she was really happy to live in a land of liberty. Then one day, her world changed. Her father came home. He told the family they were moving. They had a few days to get ready. They could only take as much as they could carry. I want you to stop right now and look around your room. And if somebody walked through the door today and said, "We're moving, you have 2 days, and you can carry, what you can amount to carrying in your backpack or on your back," what would you choose to take? So they could only take as much as they could carry. They might never see the things that they were going to leave behind again. They were going to live, against their wishes, in a prison-like camp. What had they done? In just a minute, and I'll get to that. But first, imagine that you're Haruko and you have some really hard decisions to make. You're going to need to make them really quickly. What are you going to choose? Your dog can't go. You'll have to give away your books and games and toys. Well, not if they're heavy. No one knows exactly where the camp is. It could be hot. It could be cold. You can't take much besides your clothes. Your parents have to sell the car, the house, almost all their possessions right now. So they're going to get almost nothing for them, and the community knows this and is waiting for the last minute to sweep in and take advantage of the situation. You and your family are going to a camp surrounded by barbed wire fence. Armed guards stand in watchtowers. If someone tries to walk out into the desert, they'll be shot. And what have you done? Nothing. You've done nothing wrong. You read that right. The Obatas have done nothing at all. They have been fine citizens of the United States, but they're of Japanese descent, and the United States is at war with Japan. There's this anti-Japanese hysteria in America, especially on the West Coast. And some of it's understandable because war is terrible and the Japanese government is doing horrible things, but the Japanese in America have nothing to do with that, and some people don't understand that. So many authorities expect the Japanese to attack the West Coast. They say a Japanese submarine has fired shells that landed harmlessly near Los Angeles, but people are terrified. There are rumors that the Japanese American fishermen are sending signals to Japanese ships and planes. There's no evidence of this, but in wartime, who can be sure? Reports of Japanese atrocities in Nanking, China, and elsewhere are horrible and turn out to be true, but Japanese Americans again have nothing to do with that, just like German Americans had nothing to do with the savagery of Nazi Germany. Most Japanese Americans feel anguish. They love the United States. They love their home. They love opportunities and its inspiring vision, but they also take pride in their ancient Japanese heritage, and for them, for some of them, World War II might seem like a civil war. In addition, the Japanese in America face a really special problem. It's an old problem, but it's racism. A racist law prevents Japanese immigrants from becoming citizens. However, anyone born here is automatically an American citizen. So 2/3 of the Japanese Americans are Nisei, the Japanese word for those born in America, and they are citizens. Racism has been part of American history from the time of the first contact of Europeans and Native Americans, but so has the fight against racism. That clash between bigotry and decency is found in the human drama in every culture. Now the racists have something important on their side. It's war and the fear that war brings. And there's something else here too. It is greed. Japanese Americans have been very industrious. Their property is valuable, and if they are put behind barbed wire, their property will have to be sold and quickly for much less than it's worth, or perhaps even nothing, and some people are going to profit mightily. So the first calls for internment, putting the Japanese in camps, come from newspaper columns. And then a group of West Coast politicians join in. They include Earl Warren, who will later become Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, says quietly that internment is unnecessary. The FBI can handle surveillance of suspects, but Norman Thomas, leader of the American Socialist Party, is a lonely political figure who speaks out forcefully opposing internment. The Attorney General reminds the Secretary of War that the Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures. The 14th Amendment says, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, and property without the due process of law, but we are at war. And the War Department is worried about national security. And so the right of habeas corpus has been shelved in wartime. President Roosevelt issues Executive Order 9102. 120,000 Japanese Americans have a few days to get ready. They will be sent to 10 different internment camps, actually more than that, 10 major relocation centers, but there are far more small-scale ones. Here is how Haruko Obata described her arrival at Tanforan Camp. And we're going to use the Manzanar, which is closer to our location. The images from there for this purpose. When we arrived at Tanforan, it was raining. It was sad. It was depressing. The roadway was all mud, thick mud, and our shoes were getting stuck in the mud when you walked outside. They gave us a horse stable the size of our dining room with a divided door where the horse put his head out. That was our sleeping quarters. There were 2 twin beds made of wood, bunk beds, and another bed on the opposite wall. It was supposed to be a couch, but it was made of wood too, and there was nothing else, nothing. That one time I cried so much. That was the only time I cried. It was awful. There is so much more to the story, much, much more. Mostly, it is of a people who, as soon as they got settled, didn't cry. They did their best in a bad situation. They planted seeds and grew crops. They raised farm animals. They fed themselves and sent the surplus to support the war effort. They fixed up their sleeping quarters. They established schools and churches and recreational facilities when they were allowed. Newspapers and scout troops and even baseball teams in their own camp. Some were let out of the camps to work in war factories. Some became soldiers. A Nisei regiment fighting in Europe won more commendations than any other regiment in the whole United States Army. It was called the 442nd, the Go for Broke Regiment, which a video clip is going to talk to you about after this is over. We were fighting for the rights of all Japanese Americans. We set out to break every record in the Army. If we failed, it would discredit all Japanese Americans, and we were not going to let that happen, said one soldier of the 442nd. The images you've been seeing, the paintings you've been seeing, they are by a Japanese artist named Estelle Ishigo, who was interned in the Japanese camps and created this art while she was there. More than 16,000 Nisei served in the Pacific, most in military intelligence, working as interpreters. Some went behind enemy lines as American spies. Japanese-American women volunteered and served in the Women's Army Corps and as Army nurses in the Red Cross. At first, people in the War Department objected to the idea of Nisei serving in the Army, but finally President Roosevelt spoke up and said, "The principle on which this country was founded and by which it has always been governed is that Americanism is a matter of mind and heart. Americanism is not, and never was, a matter of race or ancestry." Now, of course, says the same guy who issued the executive order. So in the course of the war, I'm going to go back and let you look at some more images first. And let's go to this one. In the course of the war, 10 people were convicted of spying for Japan. 10! And all were white. Only one Japanese American was ever convicted of treason. She was Eva Ikuto, a graduate of UCLA who was in Tokyo when the war began and couldn't get home. She was known as Tokyo Rose, and she agreed to do propaganda broadcasting to avoid work in a munitions factory. She was paid $6.60 a month. Eventually, the camps were closed and people went out and did the best they could to rebuild their lives. It was not easy. They had lost everything, all their possessions. Many were faced extreme racism when they tried to find jobs in new homes after the war. And now you may be thinking that racism is terrible, but that really is not the only problem for people who are made to suffer. Don't be fooled. Hatred is contagious. It spreads quickly. It's like poison gas that both sides used during the First World War. When the wind changed, it blew back right upon the people trying to gas. No people are immune to the virus of hate. It's how they handle it that decides the kind of people that they are. The nation was founded on the idea that all men are created equal. A group of women at Seneca Falls, New York, changed that to all men and women are created equal, and that is what we believe. That is what this nation is all about. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States. That is the preamble to our Constitution. Remember George Washington's words, "The government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance." The more you read about history, the more you will realize that haters never win. Eventually they get found out and put down. Often, unfortunately, it takes time. 40 years after the end of the war, the American government officially apologized to the Japanese Americans for the terrible injustice done to them during World War II. Those who had been in the camps were given money in partial payment for their suffering. That's not quite true. There was a Supreme Court case, Korematsu versus the United States, in which this whole idea of reparations to Japanese interned citizens came to the Supreme Court, and they did rule on behalf of the Japanese interned citizens. However, not all those payments were made, and it was too late for many. Those who had been in the camps were given money in partial payment for their suffering. Today, when we Americans think back on the internment camps, we feel some shame. I also challenge you to be thinking about the steps toward dehumanizing an enemy and some of the images that you saw. So, this is going to be kind of annoying for me to go back, but some of the images that I think are just definitely worth some analysis are the way that the labeling was occurring. I think it's one more back. Yeah, this labeling, I mean, there are a lot of photographs that disturb me. And also, there was some death in these Japanese internment camps. I'm not comparing them to the genocide that occurred in Germany at all, but there were people that gave up, that were so conflicted and afflicted by what was happening that they committed suicide. So there was loss of life, and this labeling bothers me, just like many other things.